right, good morning, everybody. So just a reminder for all of our new doctors here, I'm James Hassel, and I'm going to give you guys an intro that I've been giving now for the past few years, and it's largely a quick history on Kings County Hospital, but I'll also be adding this year in the history, a little history of the start of our emergency department at Kings County. And then if I have a little time, just a little pep talk I like to give that I kind of change up every year depending on what I talk about. Um, so disclosures. As many of the people who have known me, I really love Kings County, right? And why is that disclosure? I mean, I really love Kings County. So you always have to take everything I say sort of with that in mind. And this is just one shot. I have more now, just all the different things I've collected about Kings County and to a smaller extent downstate over the years. Why do I do that? Because I really love Kings County. And I'm hoping today to show you why I love it so much and why I want you guys to be excited that you're going to be a part of the history of these institutions as well. But I've collected all manner of like old photos, 100-year-old photos, maps of the time before the hospitals were built and at the time they were built, old alumni association documents that for groups that don't exist anymore. And right here, my prize piece. This is the trowel that they commemorated the 100-year anniversary of the hospital with that I found it. Some guy in Tennessee had and was able to kind of get it back home here. So why am I so obsessed with Kings County and where we've come from and what we've done? So this Kings County place started back in, we recognize it as 1831, although a lot of the history books say maybe 1830. And it started because in 1824, a law was created in New York from the New York State government that land should be set aside in each county in New York State to be used to house and care for the poor. They weren't specific on what to do with it or how to do it, but the idea was to have every county somehow get land that would not be taxed for real estate tax or property tax by the government. They would allow the county leadership to tax the surrounding community and use those taxes from the people to pay for whatever they felt was needed to do their projects and their works on the land. And this land is literally the land that the hospital is currently sitting on. It's the same plot that this was all built on. And so there was a family named the Martens family. They have a street named after them that's a few blocks away. I don't know if they were good people or not, but they donated a big plot of farmland. So at least for this story, they were good people. And the first thing that was built around, as I said, 1830, was the Brooklyn or the Kings County Almshouse. And so at the time in the 1800s, the almshouse was the governmental center to be shelter, to house the poor, kind of a group living in kind of caring space. Wasn't optimal. The care wasn't always very good and the conditions were not necessarily good, but the thought was there. The novel thought of let's tax the people who have money to take care of the poor. And so that was created in 1830 or 1831, if you kind of recognize what Kings County Hospital recognizes. So in 1857, the state government said, hey, let's start sending out a senator to actually go and see what did the counties do? Did they actually do what we asked? Because remember, this is in the early 1800s. So it wasn't like you had easy communication to figure out what was going on. So when the survey came down to see what was built upon the land, they found not only was there an almshouse, but there was also a hospital and they call them, right, an asylum or a lunatic asylum, but a psychiatric hospital as well on the land. And when you look through the documents of what they commented on when they came to the land that all these things were built on, especially when you look at the asylum that was built, there was a lot of interest in the way that they were treating patients here. At the time in the 1850s, the way to treat lunacy was to restrict, lock in rooms, straight jackets. It was very restrictive, as we know, right? Not very helpful. But here, the center noted that the patients were just, quote unquote, freely walking around the grounds, enjoying the fresh air. And he said it's remarkable that doctors realize that the patients do better when you treat them like human beings. And they noticed that, and when they asked, hey, how come you even develop this? The leaders in Brooklyn had said, we noticed that when the poor came, they often were sick. They had mental illness. And so we felt that in order to take care of the poor, we had to take care of these other things as well, which we know today is still kind of the situation, right? So even back in the early 1830s, that was the goal of the hospital and the goal of the land was to take care of the poor, take care of the sick, to take care of those with mental illness. And that led to kind of the pervasive motto of Kings County of being kind of community first and serving the neighboring community. And there are a lot of historical successes from then up until now. There was a big push to ban family planning services and birth control to the poor at one point in the history of this country. And the physician who led the charge against that was a doctor who worked at Kings County Hospital, and was able to kind of prove that by providing family planning services, it improved the health and outcome of the poor. It was better for both family health and population health, and got all these bans and laws reversed to support family planning services, right? It's interesting, right, how history can maybe repeat itself, and how things kind of keep coming around in different versions, and sort of a similar situation happening in our country now. But it was the first hospital that did open heart surgery on a patient. Kings County was the first hospital to get MRI images of an actual patient or a human being, and not just images of inanimate objects or other animals. It was the first hemodialysis machine was created at Kings County, and not some decades later at Downstate, the first kind of portable dialysis unit was created at SUNY Downstate. And there's a few other things, and it was all under this idea that it wasn't just, this is the place for the poor to come and for the sick to come, and we just try to piece together what we can. It was really trying to innovate and do the best for the community. And so that has been the purveying kind of history and legacy of Kings County Hospital. And that's why I really fell in love with it. Now, that is not to say, as I alluded to before, that care had always been perfect, that the place has been just an absolute beacon of hope and the ideal way to treat things. And I've seen some of that since I've come here. We have sometimes faltered. We've forgotten the way that we're supposed to be caring for people. But I've seen it rebound, and I've seen these amazing changes. And this is just something right before I came out to Brooklyn, something that had happened at our psychiatric unit about a bad patient situation, bad outcome that caused this big uproar in the state to come in and to re-regulate everything. And what happened is now we are in New York at least, one of the best centers for care for psychiatric patients, because it got the attention that is sort of needed to get the funding and get the resources to improve and be better. And it's because everyone rose to the occasion, and we knew we did not want that to be kind of the legacy that our hospital kind of continues through. So there's been ups and there's been downs, but always it has rebounded for our community. It's an amazing, beautiful, hardworking, vibrant community that we all know deserves the greatest care and deserves the utmost respect. And it's really up to us to keep providing and innovating and pushing towards not just settling for what we have or what little we have to take care of our patients, but to really take charge and keep being those innovators. And that includes all of us kind of sitting here today to kind of remember that and to try to give back to our patients whatever way we can. So how does that tie into the history of the creation of our emergency department? So emergency medicine in the past was, for the longest time, not its own specialty. it was a division of other things. It was a division of internal medicine, like nephrology or rheumatology. It was a division of surgery, so there's general surgery and trauma surgery and emergency medicine, but it was not an independent entity. And that changed kind of in the 70s. That became a change where you could start having residencies to train specifically emergency departments that led to the creation of just independently trained emergency medicine physicians. And the history of emergency medicine is interesting in general, if you like the history of these types of things, I guess. But for our department rose up out of, yet again, another interesting kind of historical event that happened in our community. So on August 19th, 1991, there was a 7-year-old Guyanese boy named Gavin Cato, who lived in the community in Crown Heights, so not far from here. And he was riding his bike with either his family or his friend, and his bike chain came off. And so he pulled it off onto the sidewalk on the corner of President, and I think it was Utica Avenue. So as I said, pretty close to here. And he was fixing his bike chain, putting his bike chain back on his bike so he could ride his bike. And at the same time, going down President Street was a procession kind of being led by the police of a rabbi who lived in the community, like a prominent religious leader. And so there was a few cars that were following the procession and going down the road. And the car at the back of the procession was starting to fall behind. And he was trying to catch up, and the light was changing from, green to red. And he, being in this procession, this formal procession, thought, hey, I can, just speed up and go through this red light because we have this procession, this official procession that's happening. And so as he sped up to go through the red light, another car came, caused an accident. His car careened off the road and hit into the side of the road where there is this large stone, either outcropping or support structure. And whether it was his car or the stone that came crashing down, pinned Gavin Cato and his friend kind of against the fence there. And Gavin, more or less died, there at the event. Now, what happened next is kind of up for debate, and I've looked at different articles and I've heard the stories told by people who were here at the time, and it all differs a little bit slightly, but one of two things happened next when this accident happened. The first is that the volunteer Jewish ambulance corps, the Hassel, had came on scene. They specifically are a volunteer ambulance crew for the community, the Jewish community in Crown Heights. And they arrived on scene first, followed by NYPD, and then followed by city ambulances, such as the ones that would take patients to Kings County. And either, from one account, people on the street said the ambulance came and they went straight to the car that had crashed. And they took out the driver, who was Jewish, and kind of checked his injuries, which were not so severe, and sort of left the scene without really checking to see how the children were doing, without really helping to try to remove the car or the stone, and took that driver off to the hospital. The other account from Hatzola is, when they came on scene, that the crowd had formed that were angry at the driver and were pulling him out and were threatening to hurt him, and that NYPD had directed them to take him away now for his safety. So we'll never know what really happened, but the outcome was still the same. What was perceived from this event was that there was preferential treatment, and that this Jewish ambulance corps was giving preferential treatment to a Jewish person instead of trying to help the Guyanese child that had been crushed. And what this resulted in is something called the Crown Heights or the Brooklyn Race Riots in 1991, which was 3 days of riots against the Jewish community, vandalism and acts of crime in sort of retaliation to this event. So how does that lead to our emergency department? So about 3 hours after this accident, and the mob had started and the riots were starting, the mob was walking down the street and came across this gentleman whose name was Yankel Rosenbaum. He was from Australia and is here studying. He was a graduate student. He was studying here, and he was walking home. This was early in the morning on the 20th of August, and he was beaten and he was stabbed multiple times, and he was taken to Kings County Hospital. right? The greatest trauma center on earth. Except at that time, it wasn't the greatest trauma center on earth. It was not a fully fledged emergency department. It was kind of a division where the internal medicine doctors and the trauma surgeons were staffing the ER. Trauma was rampant during that time in the 90s in our communities. And so the head trauma surgeon was upstairs in the OR. He had one room that he was doing a gastrectomy. He had another room that he was staffing for someone who had just been stabbed in the neck with a carotid injury. And then Yankel Rosenbaum was brought into the ER, which was being staffed only by a PGY2 surgical resident at the time. And they saw some of the stab wounds. They put a chest tube in the right side, but the resident missed a stab wound somewhere on the left side of Yankel Rosenbaum. And eventually, by the time someone came down from the OR to kind of check to see what was going on in the emergency room, they realized he was bleeding out. They did a chest X-ray. He had a white on the left side, and he died on the table upstairs. So this led to an outcry that the care was not optimal, that there wasn't efficient staffing, that the residents weren't properly trained to manage trauma and emergency services and other complications. And so in order to remedy this situation, the famous trauma surgeon at the time, Tom Scalia, was named the chair of the emergency department, and he created and assembled his staff of attendings to lead what was in New York City the very first independent department of emergency medicine. So there are other emergency departments, but they were all still divisions in New York City. So we were the first one in New York City that was created in 1992. That led to 3 years later, the creation of our residency program. And some of the attendings at the time, who started this department still work here. Dr. Sinner, Dr. Barron, they were from the original crew. The story goes that first residency class, they were approved outside of the match. So the match had already happened. But there was 150, 200 applications for students who had not gotten into EM residency. And so for 3 days, they set up in the conference room that you guys were sitting in yesterday, and they took applications as people flew across the country. It was all a paper match, and they fielded just paper applications all days for 3 days. And then they got on a plane and flew to Chicago and submitted their list of who they were taking for residency. And apparently it was a real ragtag group, that first group. The three ended up in prison at some point shortly after that for various reasons. But they were the people who would argue with the consultants. They were a little bit too gritty, but they were fiercely passionate about being that first class and set the tone kind of for the residency going forward. And that's what we've seen, right? It started out just as the docs who could handle everything, who could take all the trauma and resuscitate and be these badasses running down the hallway and stabilizing all these patients. And it's grown, right? Now, it's not just about all of the medical care, it's about education. It grew to all of our teachers, whether it's us teaching each other here at conference, but also teaching the future leaders in emergency medicine. And when you look at the leaders in the world of emergency medicine in New York and around the country and the globe, you'll see a lot of them came through here at some point, whether for residency or afterwards. And that also led still to the idea that we are social advocates, that we're not just here for the pure and simple medical sense of the word doctor, but kind of really reliving what that message and that mission was for Kings County as it first started back in 1831. And so that is why we're here, right? That history has led up to this point. And for me, that's what excites me about being here. And to know that I might somehow be a part of that history, whether it's not even for recognition, just knowing that I somehow help continue that thread, keeps me energized and kind of keeps me coming back to work. And it's why I say I don't think I could find another place quite like this that I would enjoy my own career. So sounds great, right? Let's get right in there. Everything's perfect. Well, even I, the person who loves this place definitely more than anybody, will admit it's not completely perfect here. So let's take off the rose-tinted glasses for a moment and let's highlight a few things. I mean, first, this is a messy place to work. It's not neat and organized and perfect. This is not the type of thing that you can just come in, come straight home, and not have a lot of mess in your mind, a lot of mess on your scrubs that you don't need to try to wash away. It's a busy place, and when it's a busy place, it's a crowded place. It can be frustrating. You are taking care of patients in the hallway more than you're taking care of them in rooms because we just don't have space for them. We're taking care of them in the hallway outside of the emergency department sometimes because we can't even get them through the doors to our main hallways. And they become really, really frustrating, especially when you feel that if you just had a little bit more resource or a little bit extra staffing or one extra MRI or extra CAT scan machine, you could provide even better care, and you'll feel hampered by it. That if I just had a place that gave me just a little bit more, I could give back to my community even better. And that can be pretty hampering. It can be sometimes a little bit depressing to think that we know we can do better, but we just don't have the means to maybe do that. So how do you combat that? How do you stay positive? How can you still see what the mission of this place really is through all of those hamperings? So, right, this comes to the classic dichotomy of optimism and pessimism. And I've identified myself. I'm more of an optimist. But nowadays, about a decade ago, this was a thing, and now it's all the rage now. Something called defensive pessimism. It's the idea that being a pessimist is good because when something bad happens, you've already foreseen all of the negative outcomes, and it doesn't deal you a really big blow when it happens. And it's been shown, it can be good. It can be bad too, because you're just going to be anxious all the time because you're thinking everything's terrible and the worst thing is going to happen. So yeah, you're prepared for it, but you're living your life basically in anxiety and depression in order to make sure you don't get more depressed. But the opposite is the problem too, right? You can't just say that everything is amazing and just pretend like it's all perfect, because then that's when you have the also rage topic of toxic optimism. You have to find some balance in the middle. Otherwise, you are just going to lead yourself down a path of either thinking nothing's ever going to be bad and then being disappointed and crushed when it happens, or thinking everything's always going to get worse. And yeah, either you're right or you're wrong, but you're living your life full of pessimism. So it really comes down to how you balance this. And there's all great articles in the world of psychology and cognitive behavioral study on just unrealistic optimism. And there are three sort of types of unrealistic optimism. There's the illusion of control, that we can control everything and that I can fix everything and I can manage everything to make sure that everything works out perfect no matter what. And we see that mostly in gamblers, right? We think they can beat the system if they keep going, they can keep, and you just eventually you lose all your money if you keep going. And we can fall into that pitfall at work if we think I can absolutely handle everything. It's probably unrealistic. At some point, the system just isn't built for us to completely handle everything perfectly. There's this illusion of like above average that everybody thinks, maybe that they're not the best, but everybody thinks they're above average. And if you poll a group of people, who here thinks they're, they have above average intellect or above average this or that, usually way more than 50% think they're above average, which means that nobody really thinks they're below average in something. And it sets up kind of unrealistic expectations that you could be great, but maybe you're not in the top 50% of a cohort. And then there's the classic meme, which is the best fitting of all, of optimism bias, that nothing really bad is going to happen to us. Bad things happen to my patients, bad things happen to people, but nothing really bad ever happens to me. And when the whole place is burning down, it's okay. Nothing bad is really happening to me. Nothing bad is going to happen to me. And that's why I think a lot of us really kind of like this trope so much, because it's not fine. And this is kind of the exact example of what having too much optimism can really cause problems with you at work. So what does that mean? Does that mean we should be avoiding optimism? We should just be pessimistic if the place is getting tough? No, because you don't want it that your little child or your nephew or your niece who has all these big dreams that are unrealistic, right? Not just to tell them, no, that's not going to happen. You're going to not achieve your dreams, and you have to be realistic with it. But you have to find a balance. You can't just assume that the greatest things are going to happen at work every day. You have to balance out how it's going to be on your clinical shifts. And so it kind of comes down to something my father once told me, right? There's the old saying of the grass is always greener, on the other side of the fence. And that's sort of the pessimist view, that You always think everything's better than what you're standing on. And so you're always going to be disappointed when you look out and see that something else is better. Um, but he always used to tell me it's not even about where is there green grass. Is you have to realize everybody's grass is kind of dead a little bit. There's a little bit of brown patches everywhere. And when you realize that everywhere has patches of brown, you just get used to the fact that that is what is normal. And so the concept that I wanted to just kind of highlight is the idea of just normalizing during shift and neutralizing during shift. It's not about being optimistic about something or being pessimistic about something. It's just saying, I just need to get to a point of just, this is just the way that it is. And let me just neutralize what's going on here and say, this is just how it is. And it's really not that bad. But it's not going to be perfect elsewhere either. This is just kind of the way that it is perfect here at downstate at Kings County. And so to kind of look at those brown patches, not as dead patches, but that's just a part of it. And any place you go, it'll be the same way, no matter which emergency department you go in. So then what do you do on shift? What do I do on shift to sort of normalize or neutralize to make sure that all of the negatives aren't building up, while also not just being deluded that everything is perfect in the room and that nothing could be going better? So you have to really find your oasis during shift. Now, I'm not talking about after shift where you need to find your support system and your decompression rate. There's all these other strategies after shift you need to do as well to kind of bring yourself back down and center yourself. But during shift, you have to find your oasis in that desert. What do I mean by that? You need to find something that in the middle of your shift, you can really hold on to that will re-energize you. That may be that can of Celsius that all the residents are drinking. That may be going and just getting a little fresh air and back, or just getting a snack, right? The simple things. But for me, it's really talking and finding that patient, talking to that patient, and getting to know a little bit more about them that is completely unrelated to why they're there today. Something I enjoy the most about being an attending, when you guys give me a great presentation and a great workup plan, I don't have to spend as much time going back to the history of the physical exam. I can spend a little time asking my patient, what neighborhood do you live in? And I try to learn a little bit about every neighborhood in Brooklyn so I can talk to them about it. Where did you grow up? Do you work? What do you do for a living? What did you used to do for a living? Let's talk about your job a little bit. And you will meet some amazing people with amazing lives, with interesting stories. And all of a sudden, in the middle of someone cursing at me in 17 hallways, I hear vomit just hit the floor behind me, someone else is angry that their CAT scan isn't read yet, I have this like little oasis of me and this patient where I'm just talking about the person in front of me, which is why I came into medicine. It's why I work here, is to take care of these patients, not just any patient, but my patients here. And that is my little oasis that I get out of it. That may not work for everybody. That may not be your oasis, but that is how in the middle of a shift, I get a little something that I feel re-energizes me and reminds me of why I'm there and who I'm taking care of. So I kind of encourage you all, especially to our new doctors here, to that when you're frustrated on shift, just try to find what is that little oasis that you can take for a couple of minutes, that you can revisit a few times during your shift to just recenter you, to normalize all the bad stuff that's happening, to keep yourself realistic about what's going on in there, and kind of keep yourself pushing forward to the end of your shift. And then you can do all your re-energizing stuff at home, and that'll be lectures on what to do, and we'll be mentoring you guys on how to do that too. But find your oasis in the middle of your shift to center yourself and remember why you're there. And it sounds corny, but I really do it, and it really helps me. And I think if you talk to a lot of residents, they probably have something like this too. So I'll end with this. The original entrance to the B building, when you guys look across the street, there's this beautiful stone entryway that was built in 1931 for the 100-year anniversary of the hospital. And so they built this structure, and they etched all these names of famous physicians and scientists in the front. And inside, they inscribed this kind of famous saying that basically says, "To all who serve here, remember that this hospital was dedicated by the city of New York to the care of the poor, the helpless, and the afflicted. This before all else." So in 1931, they were reaffirming the point. Remember, everyone who comes here, remember, this is for those who are helpless and afflicted. Don't forget that is why this hospital exists. And this phrase has kind of been a mantra for our hospital leaders. It's been our mantra for New York City Health and Hospitals. You'll see emails that sometimes are ended with this before else, and that's where it comes from. And so that's what I want you to remember. This place is steeped in history, and it's the most important thing I think that we need to remember as we're working here. And just to quote the Dalai Lama, just try to be optimistic about it all and remember that it just feels better as you're kind of going through here. So hopefully that gives you guys a little insight on where we came from. There's a lot more history, but I just kind of condense it down to what I think is kind of important and I find interesting. And hopefully you guys can get involved with it and feel a part of that history too, and really take charge and continue our tradition forward. Thank you.